Welcome to the FITz and Healthy podcast. I am your host, Dr. Lauren FITz, and today I am solo because Alabama had some really bad storms last night and they have no electricity or power. So it is just me, but this is the much anticipated episode, part 2 of the glucose monitoring. The first episode we did, part 1, back at the beginning of December after I did the 21-day CGM experiment. And CGM, just for those of you that possibly haven't already listened to part 1, which, by the way, you should probably just pause this right now and go listen to part 1 before listening to this part 2. But if you're watching live, just so you know, the CGM stands for continuous glucose monitoring. And this was a little experiment that I did on myself using this little device that is a sensor for the Freestyle Libre, which is one of the few CGM devices that are available for people that are diabetic. And no, I'm not diabetic, but briefly, I had this idea because I have used the capability of monitoring your blood glucose by pricking your finger and putting it into a glucometer. I've used that on myself, and I've used it on clients that I've coached for now almost 4 years. And it's an amazing tool to be able to let people understand what food is doing as in regards to affecting their blood glucose and how they feel in regards to what their blood glucose is and what it's doing, the patterns that come along with it. So today we're going to talk about the second part of my CGM. The first part, so it was a 21-day experiment, and for 3 days I did a different diet. I started off with the SAD diet, which is standard American diet. Then I went to the low-fat diet, which is basically the food pyramid. So 6 to 8 grain servings of healthy, and I air quote, healthy whole grains a day, with basically a lot of carbohydrates, not much fat, and eating 5 to 6 small meals throughout the day. This was what I thought was healthy for the longest time, because in my 20s and early 30s, that's what the fitness magazine said. The little bit of nutrition that I got in medical school, that's what we were taught. And I followed it, and I gave my patients advice to follow that as well for many years. And coworkers that would always come to me asking for advice, I would give them that. And it wasn't until I had my own realization that my waistline was increasing and my blood work was showing that I was already insulin resistant at 35. That is when I started to realize, like, ooh, okay, maybe this low fat diet isn't for me. So in the first two parts of the CGM, I went SAD to low fat, and then I did a vegan diet. And I did a vegan diet, and I talk about this in part 1. I did a vegan diet in the way in which if I were to decide to go vegan, I would eat that way. So that means that I didn't eat the processed vegan food, because dirty vegan is done. I mean, when people go vegan and they eat just a bunch of processed foods and no meat, it's not healthy. And I'm not going to get on that soapbox right now, but I did vegan in which I would approach it. So eating whole foods and not eating processed foods. And I talk about that all on part 2. So I talk about that on part 1. So today in part 2, I'm going to talk about the second half of my CGM, because I went into, after the vegan diet, I followed a high fat, low carb, moderate protein lifestyle, and I started to incorporate intermittent fasting. I did that for 3 days, and then I went on to do a pure ketogenic diet, which I'm going to talk about the difference between those two, because there's a lot of confusion, and the food companies that realize that if they put the word keto on their package, they make a lot of money. They basically profit from you not understanding the difference and just really what keto means, right? And then after 3 days of keto, I went and did a carnivore diet, which is just like it sounds. It's all meat. And then I finished up my CGM I had planned on doing a 3-day water fast, but ended up doing a 2-day water fast. So today, part 2, I'm going to be talking about that second half. And then I have a ton of questions that you guys asked me. Back when I did, I wrote it all down, and I'm going to try and address as many as possible. So I want to first start off by answering a question, actually. Is there a best diet? And I will tell you that, again, I'm a medical doctor, not your medical doctor. and I don't know where that music came from, little technical difficulties. But I'm not a nutrition expert by any means. And I know that there are some people out there that went to school and got a degree in nutrition, and the registered dietitians out there. And I've heard flack from people like that have those degrees. Like you are not an expert. You are 100% right. But in this experiment, I can tell you what diet worked best for me, what lifestyle worked best for me, and why that is. And so there is no one perfect diet. But I will tell you this, that out of all of the different ways that you have an option to eat, the one thing that I would say for every single person listening is that if you want to take a hold of your own health, you have to change what you eat. And the first place to start is honestly getting rid of all processed foods and getting rid of those refined sugars, refined grains, everything that has to go through a refined process. Basically, just get rid of fake food. So you'll hear me say frankenfoods often, and that's what I mean. Fake foods that were never intended to be in our diet. Foods that have artificial colors and preservatives and dyes and all sorts of chemicals that the human body, when it's ingested, it does damage, and it does microscopic damage over long term, but it leads to disease processes that I believe are fully reversible and preventable. So glucose monitoring, one of the most important diseases that I believe you should consider doing glucose monitoring, because diabetes is a terrible, terrible, terrible chronic disease that a lot of you don't realize that you're on the road to developing. Depending on where you're at, you might already be to the place that you're insulin resistant and don't even know it. And this is the whole reason why I did this glucose monitoring test on myself, was because I wanted to show you guys how important what we eat is in regards to affecting our blood glucose. And in episode 1, I gave the example of battery acid. And if you have a slow drip of battery acid on something, it over time breaks it down. And just like the insides of our body is not meant to always carry a high load of sugar in the blood. And so when it does, it's like battery acid over time, and it breaks down all of the different organ systems and leads to chronic disease that is 100% preventable. So high fat, low carb. Let's start with, what is the definition of high fat, low carb, and then we'll talk about why is it different than keto. So high fat just means it's higher fat than what we've been taught that we should be eating. And in fact, in 2015, the government basically they changed the recommended daily intake of fat, and they didn't tell people. So they didn't want to basically announce like, hey, we were wrong all of those years by telling you to decrease the amount of fat. So they basically said, they changed the recommendation, and they also took out the recommendations of the don't eat high cholesterol because it leads to heart disease, because, hey, guess what? That's actually not good science, and there's no evidence that links the two. That's neither here nor there. Higher fat basically is the traditional American diet has made us decrease the amount of fat. So now we're talking higher fat. Now, the fat content is truly one of the main differences between a higher fat lifestyle and a ketogenic lifestyle. So when I work with people, I like to try everyone on a higher fat, moderate protein, lower carbohydrate lifestyle for a few different reasons. And after doing my own self CGM, it confirmed that was 100% the way I felt the best on. And out of all of the diets, that is the one that is most maintainable. I'm going to talk about a ketogenic diet and a carnivore diet, and my own personal opinions of longevity and if it's maintainable or not. But the fact is that for me personally, a higher fat, moderate protein, lower carbohydrate lifestyle, I felt best on. My blood glucose literally stayed within that range that I set it. And I set up for my CGM, I wanted my blood glucose to stay within the range of between 70 and 90. oftentimes it would go below, but I was never symptomatic. And we'll talk about that too when we talk about metabolic flexibility and becoming fat adapted. So higher fat, moderate protein, lower carbohydrate lifestyle. So I typically will tell people, and there are some great apps that you can use, and I use with my clients. One is called Fat Secret. The other one is called MyFitnessPal. You can record what you're eating, and it gives you not just grams of fat and grams of carbohydrates and grams of protein, but it also gives you the macronutrient breakdown of the percentage at the end of the day, right? So instead of the standard 30, 40, 30, high fat, low carb, moderate protein bumps that 30 up to about 50 to 55%. And sometimes it's more like 50 to 60%. But regardless, that number, whether if you eat 55% fat on one day and 60% fat on the next day and 50% fat on the third day, like, your body is super smart. But higher fat just means bumping up that percent of macronutrient in your total breakdown of the day to somewhere between about 50 and 60%. Now, I say moderate protein because this is actually a really important element that a lot of people don't understand. A lot of us are eating more protein than we need. Again, food companies have realized that if they advertise how much protein, it's high protein or 30 grams of protein or whatever, that you're most likely going to buy it because you believe that it's going to help you lose weight. And protein is super important. And to get an adequate amount of protein is super important. But a lot of you don't realize that you're actually eating too much protein, and that too much protein actually is converted to basically glycogen, which is the sugar molecule that our body uses for energy. Okay. So that being said, moderate protein, I like to keep, for me, if I'm lifting weights, which I pretty much lift weights every single week, if I'm lifting weights, I like to keep my percent of protein between about 25 and 30 grams. Most people don't lift hard, and so I like to keep them between about 20 and 25 total percent of protein in their day. And then the rest is carbohydrates. And if that sounds too complicated for you, then just think about the carbohydrates. I try and tell them to stay anywhere between 50 to 100 total grams of carbohydrates in a day. And I want most of your carbohydrates to be coming from vegetables. And this is the biggest difference between ketogenic diet versus a high fat, low carb diet. And I will tell you this, that I do a ketogenic diet every now and then, episodically. So there definitely is benefit to doing going into ketosis randomly, and that's not even the right word, but the difference in a person that does ketogenic diet all day, every day versus periodic ketogenic diets, that for me, that is what I follow because I feel the best that way. And I also don't believe that we are meant to be in a ketogenic state all day, every day. There are some, and a lot of you that follow me closely have heard me talk about, there are some disease processes that if I were diagnosed with, let's say, epilepsy today, I would go on a purely ketogenic diet. And the difference between a purely ketogenic diet and the high fat, low carb has to do with all three macronutrients. So typically a person that is following a ketogenic diet, a strict ketogenic diet, their fat percent for the day is upper in the realm of about 80%. And I've seen and heard a lot of people say that they get closer to 90%. Protein is on the lower side, and typically they keep their total carbohydrates down less than 15 to 20. And I've heard some people say 15, some people say 20, but total grams of carbohydrates is 15 to 20. And I will tell you that this is not easy to maintain for a life. And if you followed me for any amount of time, you know that I am anti-quick fix. I don't believe in quick fix diets. I believe in people learning a lifestyle that helps them become healthy and that is maintainable for life. So right now, I'm going to give a moment for a little commercial break, and we will be right back. But I have some important stuff to talk to you about.
We'll be right back to the Fitz and Healthy podcast after this commercial break.
Hey, this is Jamie Lindberg, host of Upbeat Urbanism, a podcast where we seek to have an open dialogue about what it takes to create healthy, intentional, sustainable communities, one conversation at a time. Each episode is an interview with a city planner, leader, developer, real estate professional, or community builder. To listen, search for Upbeat Urbanism wherever you find podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at UUrbanism and on Facebook at Upbeat Urbanism. Devote yourself to your community around you and devote something that gives you purpose and meaning. Until then, keep it upbeat.
Hey, this is your boy Frog. I'm here with Chris, Justin, and Philip, and we host Turn on the Game, the podcast. The show consists of 4 men commentating on the sports world. It's strictly opinion show. It's as if you were sitting on the couch watching the game with your boys.
And you can follow us on Twitter at @TurnOnThe_game. You can hit us up on our Facebook page at Turn on the Game, and you can even follow us on Instagram at Turn on the Game.
Or you can listen to us on Podbean, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher by searching Turn on the Game.
You can email us at turnonthegame4@gmail.com.
Turn by Blacken Studios, Oklahoma City's premier podcasting studio. Turn on.
All right.
And now back to Fitz and Healthy.
All right, we are
Fitz
back.
and
Well, I'm
Healthy is a
still getting
podcast
used
brought
to
to you
the
from the
commercial
creative
break
minds
thing,
of Jessica
but
Young and Lauren Fitzgerald.
I'm super
Make
excited
sure to
about
follow-
this next part that we're going to talk about. Let's address the keto movement. Okay, now the keto movement, it's huge, and it's huge for a lot of different reasons. And you know what? If the keto movement gets you off of processed foods and gets your hormones back to where they're supposed to be, awesome. But what I will tell you is that I have seen so many of my clients who have actually either come to me firsthand or come back to me because they've worked with me in the past and had success when I put them on my no fuss nutrition approach, which is a higher fat, moderate protein, lower carbohydrate lifestyle with intermittent fasting, and confirmed by my own self CGM that that is what works best for me. But I've had a lot of people come back to me after doing a pure ketogenic diet, and they have just completely jacked up their hormones. They have hair loss. They have their GI tract is all sorts of messed up. Their energy has changed. They have dry skin, like all of these changes that show me that their hormones are not ideal. And when it comes down to it, I believe that it's because God didn't design us to be in ketosis all of the time. I believe that he designed us to be in and out of ketosis because he gave us these two energy systems of basically sugar and fat, right? Glycogen and ketones. And these are elements that are of energy that we make on our own. And I believe that for 2.5 million years that humans have been around, that we didn't have refrigeration, so we didn't have the easy access to food, so we weren't able to eat all day every day and eat every 2 to 3 hours. We had times that we feasted, and then we had times that we fasted. And I believe because of that, that is why we have this system of going in from burning sugar as fuel to burning fat as fuel. And when you are always in ketosis, that in my like simplistic mindset of just doesn't make sense that we're supposed to always be in that ketosis state where we're not eating vegetables, we're eating only fat all the time and a little bit of protein. It just doesn't make much sense to me. So a ketogenic diet basically is, you see keto done wrong in so many people, dirty keto, if you will, and they're buying all the foods that have the keto label on it, and they are taking in no vegetables, no fruit, of course, because fruit has a ton of natural sugar in it, so that's totally going to knock you out of ketosis, and they're eating a ton of meat, dairy, cheese, and they're loading their bodies up with the higher fat, really high fat. I'm going to call it high fat because higher fat versus high fat is really one of the main differences in keto versus high fat, low carb. one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that, and I brought my monitors around here, people that say that they're doing keto, if you're not monitoring your blood ketones or your breath ketones, or in the beginning, your urine ketones, you have no way of knowing that you are in ketosis. And a lot of people don't realize that they knock themselves out of ketosis with protein, because too much protein will knock you out of ketosis. Now, one of the questions that I wrote down that I wanted to answer was, how much protein knocks you out of ketosis? And there's not one answer. Everyone's different. So there are some people that are so metabolically flexible that have been, what I'm going to talk about a little bit in the future, is fat adapted. They're so well fat adapted that they easily stay in ketosis with eating an amount of protein that would knock me out of ketosis. That being said, I'm going to go ahead and show you some of the different ways that you can measure your blood ketones, because if you do want to experiment with this, again, it's more data is easier for you to follow what your body is doing when in regards to your own self experiment, your own N of 1. So right here, I have a keto stick, and this is basically something that you just pee on, and it changes colors. And I mean, it's super easy to tell you, like the dark purple is you have lots of ketones. The nude color is you're starting to make trace ketones. And this is great. It's the cheapest tool out of the 3 different ways that you can test your ketones. Definitely the cheapest, but it stops working after you've been in ketosis for a few days. And so if in the initial stages, this is a great way, and especially if you want to do it periodically and, try and go in ketosis maybe once a week, that would be a great tool to use. It's cheap. You just have to pee on the stick and be okay with that. The next one is the finger pricks glucose monitor that is also a ketometer. Not all these monitors can measure both glucose and ketones. The Precision XR by, I believe, Abbott is the machine that I use, and I bought it specifically because I wanted to be able to have the ability to test both my glucose and my ketones. But I will tell you that one little ketone strip is like $1 or $2. So it's expensive, especially if you're wanting to check your ketones multiple times a day. You're talking like a lot of money over time if you're doing that every day. I know that there's a machine called a Keto Mojo that I've heard a lot of people that I follow talk about, that they make it sound like it's not as expensive as the device I have. But then also breath ketones. And I bought this as a self-experiment. It's called a Ketonics. And you basically plug this in, the USB port, and you inhale, take a big breath in. How many of you inhaled right now when I said that? And then you literally blow on this little thing all the way out. So basically you're emptying out all of the air into this. And then it basically does this reading on the computer, and it tells you how much ketones that you have in your breath. And that's actually probably the most accurate way. But I go back and forth now that I had this device. But again, this device is expensive. I think I spent $200 or something on it. So again, when you get into the realm of self-experimentation, you have to realize that you're going to spend some money. And speaking of the devices, the CGM devices, I would love, and there is not a device like this yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if in our near future, because the CGM concept is starting to spread, and I've noticed like there's a couple of people that are pretty high profile people in the health and fitness niche that are doing the CGM right now. So it's starting to get popularity for a reason, because it's so much easier to be able to scan your little sensor than to have to prick your finger, squeeze out blood, put it on the strip and whatever. The CGM concept makes it way easier to measure data that can ultimately change your behaviors, right? And so what I would love to see in the near future is a CGM device that could measure both your glucose and your ketones. So that hasn't been developed yet, but I guarantee that people are working on it as we speak. But I do believe that measuring data, so whether you want to try high fat, low carb or a ketogenic diet, I would love for you to see what these diets do to your blood glucose. I will tell you that from the day that I started the high fat, low carb and continued to keto and continued to carnivore and then the fasting, my blood glucose never got out of that range. It never got above 90. Even on days, I believe there might have been a couple of days when I did a really hard workout and my own body's my body's system to make its own glucose. It's called gluconeogenesis that your liver does. It created its own sugar, and my blood sugar went up for maybe like 102 or whatever. But to provide quick access energy for my muscles while I was working out. But measuring this kind of data gives you an idea of how food truly affects you. And I 100% know that most people's struggle with diets and staying on them is the ups and downs, the highs and lows that whatever they are eating is causing in their blood glucose. And I saw that to be true in my own self-experiment. And obviously, man, the SAD diet was just sad. That's the only way to say it. And my blood glucose literally it stayed high for way longer than I'm comfortable it staying on a regular basis. The low fat diet, it was literally peaks and troughs, like a roller coaster ride. On the vegan diet, it was not as roller coaster ish, but it was still peaks and valleys for sure. And then once I eliminated the carbohydrates, lowered them, and started eating the high fat, low carb way, then followed by keto and then carnivore, the ups and downs of that line of my blood glucose, literally, like, it was hills and valleys instead of mountains and roller coaster ride. And I believe that is the key for a lot of people. So right now, I have a free group on Facebook, and anyone can join it. And I pop in there every Friday. It's called Food, Fast, Then Fitness. The whole concept of the name of this group is if you want to change anything, and I thought about this because it's right now, it's January, right? And of course, January, everyone's full of New Year's resolutions. And what's the first thing everyone does? Everyone goes and buys a gym membership or gets back to the gym that they've been paying for and that they just haven't been going to. But if people could focus 90% of their efforts on changing their food and adding fasting, and then that last 10% is the fitness aspect of it, they would see massive changes, not just in their weight, but their overall health. And in this group, I'm walking people through, we're doing a 30-day blood glucose challenge. And I would love for you guys, if it's, obviously you're not on day one, but it is never too late. You can do a 30-day blood glucose challenge anytime. But what I'm having them do is test their blood glucose first thing in the morning and getting a fasting blood glucose. And then I'm having them test it. I asked them to intermittent fast. So I asked them to test it right before they break their fast. And then I asked them to test it 1 hour and 2 hours after they're done eating. This way, it gives them an idea of, okay, I just had a sandwich and low-fat chips for lunch. Like that, I'm thinking back to when I was, what I thought was eating healthy would eat. I can only imagine if I would have tested my blood glucose then, what I thought was healthy, I would have realized it's actually not. And your blood glucose is still above 100. And so in this free group, I show up on for a live video every Friday, and I do a little bit of teaching and I do a little bit of coaching them. But I truly believe that if you were to take the time to go on Amazon, buy a blood glucometer, or go to Walmart or wherever, they're really cheap, and just test your blood glucose to see what your body is doing in response to the food. It will literally not just change your waistline, but change your life completely. Okay. Now carnivore, let me talk about carnivore. Carnivore is just like what I said. It is only eating meat. And there are a lot of people there's a carnivore diet movement. And if I had to choose between standard American carnivore, I would pick carnivore every time. Low fat versus carnivore every time. even vegan versus carnivore, I would choose that. But when it comes down to it, I don't believe that we humans were not meant to eat vegetables and fruit when it's in season. For me, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense that we only eat meat, because I don't believe that the humans that have been on this earth for 2.5 million years, when they didn't have access to meat, what did they eat, right? And there are so many vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients that vegetables do provide for you. Fruit, I don't believe that we should be eating it all day, every day, 365, but fruit is in season. Like when we eat it, it should be in season, and it should be local. It should be organic. But the fact is that there are some people, and I'm thinking of one particular person who she has a really bad rheumatoid arthritis, and her rheumatoid arthritis got better initially when she first started following me, and I first started teaching about a higher fat, lower carbohydrate lifestyle that's whole foods based. That's not fake foods based, but whole foods based. And obviously introduced that with intermittent fasting. And then her rheumatoid arthritis symptoms got better. And so the dose of medicines that she was on were decreased. Of course, she did that alongside her rheumatologist. But then she experimented even more. And she ultimately, she's tried every single diet, and her rheumatoid arthritis stays at bay when she eats a carnivore diet. And she said, she was like, it's boring, but this is the only way that I can eat that I don't get my rheumatoid arthritis flare-ups. And so, like I said, there's no one perfect diet for everyone. And I know there are some people that carnivore diet works super well on, because it is a very low inflammatory process. But if you're going to try a carnivore diet, I want to make sure that you understand that the quality of meat that you're eating is so important. So wild caught fish versus farm raised fish, grass-fed, grass-finished beef, chickens that are free range, that are organic, that are not given a diet full of genetically modified corn, not given antibiotics and hormones. The quality of meat is so important. And nowadays there's so many different businesses that offer that, like Butcher Box is one of them. There's one that's nose to tail, I believe. I'm going to try that one out next. I currently get most of my meat from Butcher Box. But if you're going to do a carnivore diet, just make sure that the quality of meat that you're eating is good quality, because I would rather you eat a vegan diet if you can't get access to good quality meat. But nowadays, most of you should be able to. Okay, so the fasting. I want to just touch on fasting just a bit, because I'm going to actually do an entire series about fasting, because I did an old episode about it back when I first started this podcast, but I want to kind of reintroduce this concept to you guys. And I know that some of you are like, wait, you're just, and even Chris, my man, was like, wait, you're just going to drink water for 3 days? Like, isn't that dangerous? And I want to get you guys out of the concept of fearing this concept of fasting, because our bodies were meant to fast. In fact, that's why we have this backup system of ketones, that we have excess body fat, or whether you have excess body fat or not, you have adipose tissue, which is fat cells, right? And these fat cells are your backup energy source for when you don't have easy access energy of glycogen. And so fasting is something that, like, literally the research is blowing my mind, because we are having more and more studies showing all of the benefits of an individual using fasting in their life. And there's different kinds of fasting. There's the intermittent fasting. Some people, the alternate day fasting, long extended fast. My longest fast that I've ever done is 7 days. And I know what I need to listen to in my body to stop a fast. And this is why, instead of doing 3 days on the water fast, I ended up doing 2, because I was dumb and I went to do an infrared sauna. I wasn't adequately hydrated, and I started to feel symptoms that I need to stop the fast. So instead of doing a 3-day water fast, I did a 2-day water fast. But I'll tell you that my blood glucose stayed on the lower side, but I was asymptomatic. until that, it was 2 days and a few hours into the water fast where my blood glucose was low and I started to have symptoms, and that's when I stopped it. So what I want you to understand is that the food that you eat and the way in which your body reacts to the spike in insulin, the spike in blood glucose, which makes your pancreas spit out more insulin, is crucial. There is a woman who I follow. She actually wrote a book that I recommend for everyone to read. Her name is Dr. Sarah Gottfried. I'm going to try and get her on the podcast and interview her as well. She has a new book out that I haven't read yet. But the book that I recommend for people to listen or read, it's called The 21-Day Hormone Reset Diet. And it's great because it approaches the diet in the 7 most common hormones that are affected in people. And it talks about, like, for example, the very first 3 days of that 21-day hormone reset diet, she talks about estrogen and estrogen dominance and how the meat that we're eating, so conventionally raised beef and conventionally raised meat in general, and alcohol, how those 2 alone affect estrogen and lead to estrogen dominance. And she goes on to eloquently explain how the different things affect the different hormones that are ultimately affecting your waistline and your health. So I follow her online, and I saw that she actually did. She's currently wearing the Freestyle Libre, the CGM device. And someone asked her, like, you look like you lost weight. And granted, she was not overweight before, but she said she actually did. She's lost about 20 pounds ever since she started wearing the CGM, because she dialed in how much the food that she's eating is affecting her blood glucose. And I'm telling you, the ability to scan that sensor and see all the time of okay, I just ate this and now it's affecting this. It's a powerful tool. And I went to Costco just to see what it would cost out of pocket, because I'm not a type 1 diabetic, and currently type 1 diabetics are the only ones that have insurance cover these devices. So I went just to look out of curiosity, and it would be about $100+ investment every month for the sensors, because the sensors only last 14 days. I believe it's an investment that most of you should make. And, it doesn't have to be the rest of your life, but do it for a year and realize how much that tool can change your life. So I'm going to get to questions, because when I did the CGM experiment, I had so many amazing questions. So I made a couple posts where everyone could write down questions. And so I'm going to go through these questions and answer them to the best of my ability, and hope that it helps you. So the first question I want to address is how to become fat adapted. So what fat adapted means is that when you go into the system that your body is supposed to tap into your fat storage for energy utilization, you don't get symptomatic. So this is a common thing, and this is probably going to speak to some of you. Some of you have been told that you have hypoglycemia, so your blood glucose goes low, right? And you get symptomatic when you get a low blood glucose. I'll just tell you that if you were my patient, I would tell you, you are already showing signs of insulin resistance, and we need to change that and reverse that. Because if you are showing signs and symptoms of low blood glucose, that means that you have not adapted to being able to use your own fat storage. How many people are walking around with a lot of excess adipose tissue? So that's energy, right? But they can't tap into it. The problem is they haven't become fat adapted, and more likely they're constantly getting insulin out of their pancreas. They're secreting insulin out of the pancreas because of the food they're eating and how often they're eating, and they're snacking. Snacking is something that we're going to talk about too, because we're not meant to snack, guys. Bottom line, we're meant to eat 2 to 3 meals a day and give our body and our digestive system rest in between those meals that are packed full of good healthy fat, good healthy protein, and carbohydrates from vegetables mostly. Okay. That being said, how do you become fat adapted? So that's a great question. It takes some people a couple of days. It takes some people weeks. It takes other people months. And there is no one right or wrong way to do it.
But if you are wanting to become fat adapted, I would say the first thing that you need to do is, again, get rid of processed foods and start eating whole foods. And when I say whole foods, I mean like foods that don't have ingredient labels on them. Okay. And I'm not, look, I'll be real with you. Is it possible for you to never eat a food with a food label again in the rest of your life? Probably not. But there are, if most of your diet every day comes from foods that don't have labels and don't have ingredients, it's just one ingredient. A bell pepper has one ingredient, it's a bell pepper, right? Start getting rid of all of that processed food, all of the refined sugars, refined grains, and start utilizing intermittent fasting. I'm telling you, the intermittent fasting tool is one of the strongest tools, and you guys, it ultimately saves you money. You don't realize how much money, when you start to fast, how much money you end up saving. So start there, and then go. I would utilize honestly, I would utilize the help of a coach like myself. You guys, I can coach anyone from all over the world. I just need someone with the internet and willing to invest in themselves and show up and do what I say. But becoming fat adapted has everything to do with you starting to teach your metabolism to be able to utilize glycogen or fat, ketones, whenever it needs whatever energy source. So that the symptoms of hypoglycemia, the nausea, sometimes you vomit, but very rarely, the nausea, the sweatiness, what we call diaphoresis, the lightheadedness, the dizziness, all of these signs of low glucose, that's basically just you haven't learned how to tap into your own body's resource of fat. And so all of those times when I was measuring my blood glucose and it was low, I was never symptomatic. The only time I became symptomatic was in, approaching day 3 of the water fast. And that's when I listened to my body and I ate something. Okay. So, what would you tell a type 1? So type 1, I do want to address type 1 real quickly, because most of this talk doesn't fully apply to type 1 because type 1 diabetics don't make any insulin whatsoever in their pancreas. But I will tell you, I've worked with plenty of people that are type 1, and when they change their nutrition, the amount of insulin that they require is way, way less. And so obviously, if you're type 1, you should be measuring your blood glucose and in its response to the food you're eating. The kind of foods that I see, especially in the hospital, oh my gosh, I was just talking with one of my friends who I'm going to be interviewing here in a few weeks. She's a physician, and we were just talking about how terrible the healthcare system is, the sick care system. I'm not even going to call it healthcare. And the foods that they feed our ICU patients, our diabetic patients, like it's fake food, and it's food that's not good for you. And so the type 1 diabetics that, just basically eat whatever and use as much insulin as they need, I'm telling you right now, you will feel so much better, and your disease process will be so much less severe if you change what you're eating and eat a whole foods based approach to a higher fat, lower carbohydrate lifestyle. Okay, so next question. How is the exercise blood glucose spike different than from food, and why is it not bad for us? That's a great question. So if you think about the energy, right? When it comes down to it, it's energy. And we've got the different kinds of energy. And when I think of glucose and glycogen, I think of it like kindling of a fire. You want to make a fire burn real fast, you put the newspaper or the whatever, and you put it in there, and that's glycogen. And it's very fast fuel for our body to utilize. The slow burning fuel is like coal or the logs, right? And that's what fat is. And fat will keep that fire burning a lot longer, but it's not a fast burning fuel, right? So when we're exercising, especially if we're going to do some high intensity exercising, we need fast energy, fast burning kindling, essentially. And so if you are exercising not in a fasted state, then your body uses the glucose that you've already eaten, and that's the fast burning fuel. But if you're exercising in a fasted state, you don't have that quick burning fuel, so your body does this process called gluconeogenesis that creates that fast burning glycogen, that sugar that your body can utilize right away. So that tiny spike in your blood glucose if you're exercising when you're fasted is nothing I'm excited about, because the whole purpose of our body's ability to make its own glucose with gluconeogenesis is just seen right there. Okay, next question. If we want to educate loved ones on this, where to start? Great question. And in fact, my friend that I was talking to, she's a primary care physician. And as most of you know, primary care physicians are limited to the amount of time that they can see per patient. And it's not their fault, believe me. Most of them I know would love to spend more time, but it's the system that limits the amount of time that they have. So she told me, she's like, I've been sending my patients to your podcast to just start listening. And I think that that's a great place to start. I also let her know, like, you can send them to me and let me coach them. It's when you have a person, well, first of all, if you have a person that doesn't want to change, it's hard to get them to do anything, because ultimately they have to want to change their own health. And this is why I left the healthcare system, because I was tired of dealing with people that just want a pill for a solution and just want a surgery for a solution. I wanted to work with people that really want to take control of their health and get off of medication, not need surgery, not need procedures, and really own their own health. So knowledge, I truly believe, is power. Send people to this podcast, send people to me for help in coaching. But also, the best way that you can influence the people you love is living by example, honestly. And I see this question from people that that are on my team all the time. Like, I can't get my husband, or I can't get my mom. And bottom line is, sometimes our loved ones, our family members, are the hardest to crack. And you living a healthy lifestyle and example, especially if you have a transformation, like if you came from a really unhealthy lifestyle and you've changed, that gives people hope. And I think so many people are walking around not realizing how much they're suffering every day, because that's become their norm. Excuse me. Most of you that follow me online know that I got the flu when I went to New York. Like, everyone at this big event, like 75% of people got the flu. So I haven't been sick in decades, and it literally, it gave me a humbling week and a half, and I still have a little bit of cough. Okay. Another question. What diet is cheapest? Okay. I love this question, because this is something that I want you to understand. You can either invest in your health now or pay for medical bills later. And while I totally understand that a lot of you are in a really, really tight budget, what I want you to realize is that when you feed your body these fake foods, they do exactly what they were created to do. They make you crave more of them. They mess with your GI tract. They mess with your hormones. They make it where you are constantly eating, and constantly you never feel satiated. So when I want you to stop believing what the food companies want you to believe, that it's cheaper to just go get the $4 meal at whatever fast food place. You can feed a family of 4 for $20. Guess what? That the fast food, there's nothing good, like nothing good at any of those restaurants. I would stay away from it. And you can feed a family of 4 healthy by just getting healthy whole foods. And so the cheapest diet is not the healthiest and will lead to disease. I promise you, because if you can do the dollar menu all day, every day, and I guarantee it will not just increase your waistline, but it will give you diseases, give you chronic diseases, and make the last stage of your life miserable. So I challenge you to change the way that you think of that. If you are on a really tight budget and convinced that you can't eat healthy because of that, because you can't. I promise you can. Okay, which is the hardest on the gut? Okay, this is a great question. So gut health, there's still so much that we don't know. I can tell you personally that my gut did the worst on the first half of the experiment. And on the vegan diet, it did almost just as bad as when I was on the standard American diet and the low fat diet, because my body does not do well with legumes. And legumes are one of the main, the beans basically, one of the main protein sources that vegans get their protein from. And I will just tell you, even with digestive enzymes that I took before eating, it was not pretty. So, but everyone's different. There are some people, you have to remember that the gut, it's like a garden. And this is the problem that I have with the carnivore diet and a real ketogenic diet. You cannot expect your garden to grow if you don't give it soil, right? And the soil for our gut biome is found in vegetables, in fiber, and all of these things that we need to give our gut bacteria so they can eat it and grow. Because if we deplete our gut from all of the good soil, then our garden doesn't grow. And so, this is a concern that I have with the carnivore diet long term, and the ketogenic diet, because if you want to truly do ketogenic diet, you don't eat much vegetables, and that's where you get your fiber from. And no, taking a fiber supplement is not the answer. So, okay, next question. High fat, low carb versus vegan for someone with high cholesterol and high blood pressure. Great question. I believe Mark Hyman was the one that coined the term a pegan, because the fact is that if you have someone who goes on a whole foods approach to high fat, low carb from a standard American diet, it's going to be better for them overall. If you do the same thing and you do a whole foods approach to vegan from standard American diet, it's going to be better. But the fact is that stuff like your blood pressure are 100% related to what you eat. And so high fat, low carb versus vegan is better for blood pressure. I've seen people do both in a dirty way, dirty vegan, dirty high fat, low carb, and they're still eating fake foods that have, chemicals in it and dyes and artificial sweeteners and all that kind of stuff. And neither of those are good. And neither of those will be good for your blood pressure. But if you go and change and get rid of, again, you're starting to hear a pattern, get rid of the processed foods, the refined sugars and refined grains, and eat whole food, your blood pressure is going to be better on either the vegan or the high fat, low carb. Your cholesterol, I actually just did a teaching video about this yesterday in my private group. I will just tell you this, and I'm going to probably do a whole episode about cholesterol and the myths that come along with cholesterol. But for 40 or 50 years, we've believed that high cholesterol leads to heart disease, that leads to heart attack and death. And this is why we have been force-fed the concept to fear cholesterol. And that's why you still see egg white omelets on menus and whatnot. But I will tell you that the science that started that whole movement was actually terrible science. It started with a guy that he not even a medical doctor. He was a PhD physiologist, I believe, and he had this hypothesis, this theory that eating food that's high in cholesterol leads to heart disease. And so he handpicked the countries where he was doing this research because of the outcome that he wanted. A true scientist wants to disprove their hypothesis, but he was such a zealot for his belief that it's got to be cholesterol. High cholesterol leads to heart disease. And so that started this wave. And that's when the food companies started to make everything low fat and taking, the fat out and adding sugar. And I mean, it doesn't take a doc to realize that we have totally, over the last 40, 50 years, our health as in every category has gone awry. And I truly believe it started right there. So, so the cholesterol thing, we're going to elaborate on that in a future episode for sure. Okay, so how are you getting into ketosis? So that's a great question. And we have about 5 more minutes left, so I want to make sure that I get some of because I don't have time to get all of these questions. There are some really great questions. But how to get into ketosis, this wave of everything's selling a lot because it has the word keto on it. I'll tell you this, you can get into ketosis without having to spend a lot of money on these exogenous ketones. Do I think that there's a place for the exogenous ketones? Yeah, absolutely. If you want to quickly get into ketosis, that is a tool that can help you get into the ketosis state. But you can actually just get into ketosis by eating a higher fat, lower carbohydrate lifestyle and start with intermittent fasting. Again, I would love it if you check your blood ketones to see if you're actually in ketosis. But a lot of people use these exogenous ketones to get them into ketosis. We don't know long-term studies. And so these people that are utilizing them every day, I definitely worry about the long-term effects because we don't know, bottom line. And they're not natural. Like, we can make our own endogenous ketones. So why would we not just go back to what nature gave us instead of utilizing something that was made in factory to overlap that process? Okay, let me get a few more questions. Let's see. What are good high-fat options that are dairy-free? Oh, that's a great question. I actually don't do dairy, but I did the dairy while I was on, and it was not as bad as I thought. But high-fat options that are not dairy, I mean, there's a lot. There's avocado. There's anything coconut, so coconut oil, coconut butter, nuts and seeds, meats. I mean, meats, you've got your high-fat meats that are like salmon and grass-fed beef. Lamb is one that I love. It's high in fat, and typically it's easier to find grass-fed lamb for whatever reason. But these kind of questions, you have to understand. You can go to Pinterest and get some great ideas. Go to Google, go to YouTube, and get great ideas from people that are showing you how to make these meals if you want to follow a high-fat, low-carb lifestyle that's dairy-free, because it's truly it's easy. Let's see. The last question that I want to address is insulin resistant. Does it lead to weight loss or gain? So I want to address the fact that you do not have to be overweight to be insulin resistant. And I talked about my friend from California on part 1, who is rail thin, and she was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And so she's been insulin resistant for who knows how many years. And she didn't have someone like me telling her, hey, you should check your glucose. Why not? See what your body is doing. Because if she would have done this glucose monitoring, she would have been able to see it and find it earlier. Now, is she at a point that she can't reverse it? No, she doesn't have end-stage organ damage like kidney disease and on dialysis. But if she doesn't do something about it, that's where she will end up. And so insulin resistance, yes, it for a lot of people, it does lead to weight gain, without a doubt. But just because you don't have weight gain does not mean that you're not insulin resistant already. And this is ultimately why I want you to have the glucose monitoring experience on your own, or with the guidance of me or with a functional medicine doctor. There's so much stuff that I haven't had a chance to talk about, but I want to try and respect your time and keep these episodes at less than an hour. So I will tell you this. You have everything in you to be able to take back control of your health. And there's so many tools. Some are free tools, some are expensive tools, and some are in the middle. But you have the ability to take your health back. And I believe that a tool like the glucose monitoring is one of the easiest ways that you can start that journey to becoming the healthiest, happiest you. And ultimately, my goal is to give you the gift of loving the life that you live. So that being said, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the FITz and Healthy podcast. I am so sad that Jessica couldn't make it with us today, but next week we have an amazing guest that I cannot wait to introduce you to. So until then, go live a FITz and Healthy lifestyle. Bye.
Fitz and Healthy is a podcast brought to you from the creative minds of Jessica Young and Lauren Fitzgerald. Make sure to follow, like, subscribe, and add to your playlist on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify. New episodes drop every Friday.
I appreciate your time listening so much. If you enjoyed this episode of the FITz and Healthy podcast, can you please go do me a favor and go subscribe at whatever platform that it is that you listen to podcasts. Leave a review. We read every single review, and we appreciate the time that you take to leave your thoughts and opinions. Now, also remember, while I am a medical doctor, the information I provide here is not intended to provide medical advice or professional diagnosis, opinion, treatment, or services to you or to any other individual. I am providing general information for educational and informational purposes only, and it is not a substitute for medical or professional care. You should not use this information in place of a visit, call, consultation, or the advice of your physician or other healthcare provider. The information I share is not intended to treat, cure, or diagnose any disease or medical condition. If you believe you have a medical emergency, just call 911 immediately or your physician. Now, enough of that medical legal jargon. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I appreciate your time. Now, go live